Who here has a grand design for their life? Maybe it's to go to school, get a new job, become a professional athlete, something that right now may seem unachievable or impossible. Well, I'm here today atop beautiful mare from Rafter's 6th Ranch, Pearl, at the Calgary Stampede, the greatest outdoor show on earth, to tell you that guess what? It is possible. And you know how I know? Because I did it. My name is Filipe Masetti Leite, and I am the youngest person and one of only 3 people in the entire world to cross the Americas on horseback. And what I can tell you is that you don't have to be extraordinary to take that first step, but you do have to take that first step in order to become extraordinary. I'm a 3rd-generation cowboy born in a very small town in the interior of Brazil. My name Filipe was chosen by my parents due to its meaning, a friend of horses. And I was atop a horse with my old man before I could even walk with my own legs. When I was a little kid, every night before I went to bed, my dad used to tell me Aim Chifley's Long Ride, who in 1925 rode horseback from Buenos Aires all the way to New York. I love the story so much, it became my life's dream to one day travel on horseback. My family ended up moving to Canada in the early 90s, and in my last year of university, studying journalism at Ryerson in Toronto, it was like every cell in my body was saying, this is the time. You have to leave your dream. You have to go back to Brazil on a horse. Easy peasy, right? In front of me, I had to trek more than 16,000 kilometers at 3 kilometers an hour and 30 kilometers a day, cross 12 international borders and some of the tallest and most rugged mountains in the world. Oh, and I just had one tiny problem. I didn't have a single horseshoe, no money, no equipment, no know-how. One day, I mustered all of the courage I had in me, went on Facebook and typed in, I'm gonna ride a horse from Canada to Brazil. Well, the comments started pouring in. Filipe, you're crazy. It's impossible. You're gonna die. You're obviously gonna die. At that moment, I didn't realize how important of a step I had just taken. But today, looking back, I see that that was the first step. I put my fears aside of what people would think, what they would say, all the negative things that could have happened out there, and wrote it down. That was the first step. And there are neurological studies that prove that when you write something down, you are much more likely to live it, to achieve it. For me, now it wasn't just a dream that lived inside of Filipe, now it was a project. So I built a war room and got to work. I spent 2 years in that room until I acquired the money, the know-how, and my horses. 2 beautiful quarter horses, Frenchie and Bruiser, donated by 2 ranches in Montana. I got so many no's during that period, I lost count, but I never stopped believing in myself. I never accepted failure. I discovered that persistence and positive thinking, those are the keys to opening the doors to the universe. And on July 8 of 2012, the universe finally opened its doors for me. That's the day I started my journey. It was the happiest day of my life up to that point. 2 years before, I had nothing. And there I was, starting my dream. I didn't know how far I would make it or if in fact I would die like so many people said. In fact, that first day, I made it 20 kilometers from right here, my starting point. When I knocked on that first door and asked for help and told the lady who opened it where I was riding to, she nearly laughed in my face. But I was trying, and that's what's important. I had to learn to live with very little. When I started this journey, my horses had to carry everything in the pack saddle, and it needed to be as light as possible. You realize how little you need to survive. A toothbrush, a tent, sleeping bag, some ramen noodles, 4 socks, 5 shirts. It's all I had. Yet I was the happiest I had ever been. I was in the middle of some of the most gorgeous terrain in the world, surrounded by nature. Most of the time, just myself, my thoughts, and my horses. I had to learn to live with solitude, and it wasn't easy. At first, I would talk to my ponies. They never got back to me. Then I start to sing. After about 5 minutes, I got tired of my voice and that ended. And then I'd have an internal conversation with myself. I find out who I really am, what I love, what I don't love, what my DNA is made up of. To me, the saddle was my form of meditating. It was self-knowledge. And what I can tell you today is that if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what makes you happy, where you want to get, how will you ever get there? The hardest part about my ride was not actually crossing continents with my horses. It was crossing those imaginary lines we call borders. They nearly ended my journey. Well, after 1 month on the road, I made it to the US-Canada border. I was a nervous wreck, so nervous. But this was a moment that gave me great power to continue. You see, if I looked at the journey as a whole, I would have gone crazy. It was too long, too hard. So I broke it down into reachable goals, goals that I could see. And that was the first one on a very long list. One of the questions I get asked the most whenever I do talks or book signings is always, Filipe, did you ever think about quitting? And the truth is, I thought about quitting every single day. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I was always in some form of danger, from busy roads to raging rivers, unpredictable weather, to wild animals. Oh, the wild animals. This that you're looking at right now is a snake that almost bit me, but the scariest animal of all was in northern Montana. It was early in the morning. I was already in a bad mood. I hadn't showered in days. It was so hot. I was sweating buckets when all of a sudden my horses stopped, just like this. Didn't want to continue. I started getting agitated, wanted to run back the way we just come. I couldn't understand why. I'm looking around, there's nothing. I'm like, come on, boys, let's go. Let's go, let's go. Ask them to walk. When all of a sudden, ears pointed forward, a grizzly bear comes tearing out of the forest right in front of us. The horses saved my life. If we had kept walking at the pace we were moving, that bear would have come out right where we were. It was a huge moment for me to trust my herd, my team, my horses' instincts. They smelled that bear way before I could see it. Sure, I was taking care of them. I was the leader of that herd. I had to find them water, food, a place for them to sleep every night, but they were also taking care of me. And let me tell you this, in your life, whatever path you choose to take, you must work in a team. It's the only way you will find success in your life. And most importantly, listen to that team. And this ride, it gave me a newfound hope in humanity. Every 30 kilometers, I had to knock on someone's door and ask for help. And I was never denied help. Every 30 kilometers. Well, in Central America, I knocked on the door of a small shack the size of a garage here in North America. And a lot of times in our society, we tend to measure wealth with material things. The more things you have, the richer you are. Well, what I discovered is that what really matters in life are the things you can't buy. That family had a kingdom of wealth. I was the poor person coming into their house with so many things, my iPhone, 2 cameras, GoPros, saddle, pack saddle, the horses. But they had the love of their family. They had a warm meal to eat that night. They had time to spend with that family, and they butchered the only chicken they had that night to feed me. And those are stories that changed me as a person, the solidarity of humanity, how kind people can be. I'll never forget that family. I was given so many presents on my journey by these kind individuals, from a Mustang named Dude who accompanied me all the way to Brazil with Frenchie and Bruiser, and a sword that had belonged to a Mexican family for over 100 years. But the craziest gift of them all came in Craig, Colorado. I was staying at a very nice fella's home. His name was Peter Lisker, and I stayed there for 3 days. He treated me very well. And before I left his house, he said, Filipe, I'm gonna ask you something really weird. It's very weird, but I have to ask you, will you take my sister with you on this ride? He went on to explain to me that his sister had passed away just a few months earlier. She was a horse lover. She was an adventurer. And he said, if she was alive today, there's no way we could have held her in the house. She would have gone with you. And I feel like destiny, fate, the universe brought you to my doorstep to take Naomi on one last ride. And I also believe in destiny and fate, so I put her in the pack saddle and headed south. A few weeks later, I got to a small town called Cuba, New Mexico. I got there super late. I was tired. I left the panniers, the boxes from the pack saddle, in the corral with the horses. Put up my tent, went to sleep. Woke up in the morning. When I unzipped my tent and look out, Frenchie, who was like a kid that only did bad things, had knocked over the panniers. The ashes had fallen out, and now he was eating Naomi's ashes. Run over there, jump over the fence, get Frenchie off the ashes, put them back in the panniers, say a prayer. Well, 7 months later, we're in southern Mexico, and we have a terrible accident. Frenchie was hit by a truck. Usually when a horse is hit by a vehicle, it either dies right away or you have to put it down because it breaks something and they're too heavy to put a cast on them. Miraculously, Frenchie survived. And I started to feel like, you know, it wasn't just faith to bring Naomi on one last ride, but bring her out there with me as a guardian angel. I'm sure of it. She kept us safe. There was moments where I thought I was going to die, where I thought the horses were going to die, and somehow, some way, we came out the other side. And I truly believe she was a greater force keeping us safe. Through my ride, I learned that strategic planning is the difference between failure and success. But what I also found out is that things don't go the way you planned all the time. So you have to be ready to throw it all out the window and draw up a new plan. Well, in Central America, that happened. The borders were so corrupt, so hard to cross, so much bureaucracy. I had to cross many borders illegally. And in order not to die, I had to befriend some of the most powerful drug lords in Central America. To get from Guatemala to Honduras, it was one of the worst rides of the entire journey. We were climbing up this mountain in the rainy season, 40 degrees, humid, in the middle of a forest. The horses couldn't walk up by themselves. It was so muddy, so rocky. I had to grab one horse, walk him up 200 meters, grab the second horse, walk him up 200 meters, go back, get the third horse, walk him up 200 meters. I wanted to cry. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to call my mom. And the worst part is that at the top of that mountain, there was a drug lord waiting for me. And in Central America, I went on to see 2 people shot dead right on the side of the road. I witnessed a man trying to kill his wife with 5 gunshots right outside of my window. I didn't know if he had killed her. I didn't know if he was going to kill me next. I was the only person staying in their home. Why am I telling you this? It's because your dream will turn into a nightmare at some point. It's not a bed of roses. This is the hardest thing you will ever do in your life. But do you want it, or do you kind of want it? When that horse throws you on the ground, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you get back on. That's the cowboy way. Because quitting is never an option. Well, after 7 pairs of boots, more than 300 horseshoes, and 803 days sleeping in that stinky tent, with Frenchie, Bruiser, and Dude, my kids, my children, the true heroes of this journey, we rode into the largest rodeo in Latin America, Barritos. It was a moment of deja vu for me. I had lived that moment so many times inside of me. When the bullets were flying, when I was crying, when I was hurt, I would take myself there. And I imagined it so much, the universe conspired in my favor. I entered that stadium with 40,000 people on their feet chanting my name with those beautiful horses. What everyone said was impossible. 2 years early, we proved it wasn't. A helicopter hovering over us, my family there with me. It was the greatest moment of my life. I continued with those horses to my family's ranch, retired my kids, and spread Naomi's ashes in their pasture. And that's when my life fell apart. Depression, anxiety, reoccurring nightmares. It was the hardest moment of my life. Living a life that was much more or less extreme than what I had gotten used to rocked me. So after a year, I had to get back on the road. I saddled 2 new horses and left Barritos, headed for Ushuaia, Argentina. This ride was like purgatory as I crossed 7 months in Patagonia, temperatures of -16, snow, a lot of snow, and winds of 120 kilometers an hour. But at the end of all that suffering, I was given the greatest present I could have ever asked for from the universe. At the house of a kind Argentinian family, like many who had hosted me before, I met Clara, the love of my life, my soulmate. I met someone who would go with me on these adventures. I made it to Ushuaia alive, and with Clara by my side, we tackled the final portion of this transcontinental journey, Alaska back here to the Calgary Stampede. I left Calgary in 2012, an unknown cowboy from a parking lot right by here, where I returned 8 years later, July 3rd of 2020, the Grand Marshal. I was white-hatted by the mayor, which is like getting the keys to the city. And most importantly, I asked the love of my life to marry me. Luck doesn't exist. If that kid hadn't had the courage to write it down, to take the first step, I would not be here today telling you my story. I would have cheated my destiny. What I learned from my long ride is that life is not easy for anyone. We all have fears, limitations, and problems. But when you focus on saddling your horse and riding 30 kilometers a day, you can cross continents. It's not one giant step, it's millions of small hoof prints. So take the time to learn about who you are and what makes you happy. Have the courage to take the first step and the humility to ask for help and accept it. And finally, believe in yourself. I know it's not easy, but if you don't believe, no one else will. Now get on that horse and ride off into the unknown, because life is way too beautiful and way too short to stand still.